It's good to have you here as the night settles. 11 hours in a darkened room. Curtains never opened. And you surface anyway with a heavy head and a mind moving through syrup. The body took every hour it seemed to be asking for. Yet the rest came back taxed. Thick, slow, faintly aching behind the eyes. Something in the chemistry of a night stretched too long appears to turn against the very thing you were chasing. What is it quietly trading away while you sleep on? Let the hours ahead find their own length. Beneath your drowsiness, a quiet chemistry keeps its own steady measure, asking nothing more of you tonight. Welcome to Sleepy Science Facts. The question about that long, heavy rest starts moving with us now. There is a particular kind of tiredness that only arrives after a long sleep. You went to bed early on Friday. You let Saturday morning run without an alarm. And you woke after 10 or 11 hours feeling worse than you did the night before. Heavier, slower, faintly unwell. Sleep researchers do not treat this as imagination. The state has a name: sleep inertia, and it is one of the most reliably reproduced experiences in the whole of sleep science. Underneath everything we follow tonight sits one quiet question. Why does sleeping in so often leave you more tired than rested? We are not going to rush at an answer. We are only going to look, slowly, at something almost everyone has felt and almost nobody has examined. The strangest part is not the tiredness itself, but the mismatch. Your body has just been given more rest than it gets on any weekday, and it responds by refusing to work. Your hand reaches for the phone and misses. The room seems too bright for the hour. A sentence forms in your head and then dissolves before it reaches your mouth. It is not that you are slow at the things that matter. It is that you are slow at the things that never needed thinking about. The tap, the drawer, the word for the drawer. That is the shape of the thing we are circling. Not a lack of sleep, but something arriving with the excess of it. It was never a failure of will. Sleep inertia has a duration, and it is longer than most people assume. In controlled studies, the impairment is clearest in the first 15 to 30 minutes after waking, though measurable effects have been reported to linger for an hour, and in some conditions, longer still. That is a strange fact to sit with. For a stretch of your morning, you are awake by every outward sign. Eyes open, standing, moving through the kitchen, while some part of you has not finished arriving. You may have already lived a whole conversation inside that window and not remembered it. What you call not being a morning person may in fact be a window with edges. 1. You were walking around inside without knowing where it ended. The deeper end of it has a folk name, and the name is honest. Sleep drunkenness. The clinical term is confusional arousal, and the description in the literature reads like a memory rather than a diagnosis. A person wakes, sits up, speaks, sometimes answers a question, sometimes walks, while thinking, by every measure, slowly and poorly. They are not dreaming and not asleep. They are somewhere with no good word for it. Afterwards, the memory is thin or gone entirely. The word drunkenness was not chosen for drama. It was chosen because someone watching from the doorway cannot easily tell the difference. This is the territory we live in on those long, heavy mornings, at a milder dose. Anyone who has been woken by a phone call in the small hours knows the feeling from the inside. You answered. You said words that were grammatical. You may have agreed to something. And in the morning, it is not that the memory is blurry. It is that there is no memory to blur. Only a report from the other person that the conversation happened. Confusional arousals are most likely when waking comes out of the deepest part of sleep, which is why the middle of the night produces the strangest versions. Nothing was wrong with you. A mind can be running and not yet recording, and every mind does this. On the right night, at the right depth. Not all wakings are equal, and your body already knows this, even if you have never put it into words. Some mornings you surface easily, as though you had been near the surface all along. Others feel like being hauled up from somewhere with pressure in it. You have had both kinds in the same week, from the same bed, without ever knowing which one was coming. The difference is not how many hours you slept. It is how deep you were at the moment the sleep ended. The heaviness you have blamed on yourself was mostly a matter of depth and timing. Nothing in you chose it. You were simply very far down when something reached in and pulled. Then there is the headache. It arrives on precisely the mornings you slept longest. The weekend headache. Familiar enough that clinicians have long had a name for it. And honest enough that more than one thing is probably feeding it. The late waking. And the coffee that came hours after the hour your body had learned to expect it. For people who get migraines, sleeping in is a well-known trigger, listed alongside skipped meals and bright light. The one morning you finally gave your body what you assumed it was owed. It answered with pain behind the eyes. This is the moment when most people quietly conclude that something about them is broken. It is worth saying early and gently. This happens to ordinary bodies, doing ordinary things. Coffee does not fix it, and that detail matters more than it first appears. You know the sequence. The cup is finished. 20 minutes pass. The alertness arrives. And underneath the alertness, the fog is still there, unmoved, like weather behind a window. You are awake and sharpened, and still not quite yourself. Whatever produces the heaviness of a long sleep is evidently not the same thing that caffeine reaches. Notice what that quietly implies. If more sleep does not remove this, and more caffeine does not remove this, then the tiredness may not be a shortage of anything at all. It may be a state, with its own rules, that has to be waited out rather than corrected. Watch what happens across a Saturday, and you will find the day recovers on its own schedule, regardless of your efforts. By early afternoon, the fog thins. By evening, you are unmistakably fine. Nothing you did earned that. No shower, no walk, no second cup. It simply passed, the way weather passes. That is a small observation and a large hint. Things that clear on their own tend to be processes, not damages. Nothing is being repaired here. Something is finishing. Which turns our question over slightly. Perhaps the problem was never the hours you gained on Saturday, but what those hours did to a timing you had not thought about. A timing you never had to think about on a Tuesday. Ask people to describe the state and, across languages and countries, the words converge on the same few images. Foggy, thick, underwater, cotton wool, still half in the dream. It is remarkable how little variation there is. Something private, felt alone in a dim bedroom with nobody watching, produces almost identical vocabulary in strangers who have never met. That is usually the signature of a shared mechanism rather than a personal quirk. So the first thing worth knowing tonight is not scientific at all. It is that the sensation you have quietly filed as your own strangeness, your own weakness on your own slow mornings, is one of the most common experiences a human body produces. You are never the only one. The bewilderment has a specific arithmetic to it. 11 hours. 12. Some weekends. That is nearly half a day handed over to rest, more than any weekday allows. And the return on it is worse than the 5-hour Wednesday you barely survived. There is no other part of life where the ledger runs like that. Eat more. Be fuller. Rest more. Be less rested. The rule quietly breaks. Most people, standing in the kitchen at 11 in the morning, holding a cold cup of coffee, do not conclude that the rule is strange. They conclude that they are, and that conclusion, made alone, in silence, tends to stay unexamined for years. There is a second clock in all of this, and you can feel it before anyone explains it. On Monday, your body is asked to end sleep at 6:30. On Saturday, it is allowed to end when it likes. And it drifts, falling asleep later, waking later, sometimes by 2 hours or more. By Sunday night, the hours your body keeps and the hours your working week keeps have quietly come apart. You did not travel. Nothing moved. And yet, Monday morning arrives with a weight that nothing in the weekend seems to explain. Hold that lightly for now. We are not opening it tonight in this stretch, only noticing that it is there. Consider how much of your morning you cannot account for. Ask someone what happened in their first 10 minutes after a long sleep, and the answer is usually a shrug and a guess. I think I made coffee. The alarm was on the floor, so I must have thrown it. Memory formation is unreliable during inertia, which means those minutes were lived but not written down. There is something oddly tender in that. A version of you moved through your home, capable and clumsy, and left no record. You have hours of your life like this, scattered across years. Awake, present, entirely unarchived. It is not a hole in you. It is what all minds do while they surface. Naps make the same point in miniature, and they make it faster. A short nap of 20 minutes, and you rise cleanly. A nap that runs past an hour. The deep, sweaty, curtains drawn kind, and you wake into the worst version of this feeling. Disoriented, unsure of the day, sometimes of the year. Same person, same bed, same afternoon. The only variable was duration, and the longer sleep was the worse sleep to leave. That is the whole paradox of tonight, compressed into a single afternoon. Most people learn this by accident, blame the nap, and resolve never to nap again. The nap was not the problem. The depth you reached inside it was. Notice what the body does before the mind catches up. The eyelids resist. The limbs feel weighted, as though the blanket gained mass overnight. Light through the curtain is genuinely uncomfortable, not metaphorically so. Your balance is slightly off on the way to the bathroom, and you steady yourself on the doorframe without noticing. These are not complaints people usually make out loud, because they sound like exaggerations. They are not. They are consistent, specific, and reported by almost everyone who wakes out of a long sleep. Your body was not being dramatic on those mornings. It was reporting something accurately, and the report is the same one. In every language, in every bedroom, which is usually a sign there is something underneath it worth finding. A disorientation goes beyond tiredness here, and everyone recognizes it once it is named. For a few seconds after a long sleep, you genuinely do not know which day it is. Sometimes you do not know which room. People wake convinced they are late for something that finished years ago, or reach across the bed for someone who has not been there since. Then the world assembles, quietly, the way a photograph develops. It takes under a minute. But something had to put the date and the place back, in order, every morning of your life. And whatever does that quiet work is the same machinery that leaves you standing in the kitchen with none of it. On the mornings you slept longest. That is worth following. Children show the extreme version, and parents describe it identically the world over. A child wakes at 2 a.m, sits up, cries, looks straight at you and does not see you. They may talk. They may push you away. Nothing you say lands. And then, after a few minutes, they lie back down and sleep. And in the morning, there is nothing. No memory. No fear. No residue. Confusional arousals are far more common in children than adults, and thin out with age. The comfort in that is unexpected. The thing you feel on your worst mornings is not damage accumulating. It is a normal feature of how minds surface, one you have simply carried into adulthood in a milder form. Ask around and you find the private conclusions people have quietly reached about themselves. Some believe they have low blood sugar. Some are certain they are depressed. Some suspect something undiagnosed and have never mentioned it to a doctor. Because how do you describe feeling terrible after sleeping well without sounding ungrateful? This is the loneliest part of the whole phenomenon. Not the fog, but the silence around it. Sleep inertia is described in textbooks, measured in laboratories. reproduced in strangers under controlled conditions. There is nothing hidden about it. And yet millions of people arrive at their own explanation, alone, in a dim room, and never once discover that the room next door reached the same one. Note when the state is at its worst, because the pattern is precise. Inertia is most severe when waking happens out of deep sleep and when it happens at the wrong point in the body's own daily timing. Both of those conditions are far more likely on a long, unstructured morning than on a rushed weekday, which means the weekend was not a neutral gift. It was a change of conditions, and the conditions were the thing that mattered. The question we began with is beginning to move. It may not be that extra sleep is harmful in itself. It may be that extra sleep quietly changes when and how the sleep ends. And the ending is what you feel all morning. People rarely admit to this version of it. You wake from 10 hours, feel dreadful, and the first thought is not, "I have had enough sleep." It is, "I need more." So you go back down for another 90 minutes, and you wake worse. The instinct is honest, and it is wrong. And almost everyone has followed it at least once. If the feeling were a shortage, going back down would end it. It does not end it. It deepens. Whatever this is, it does not behave like a debt being repaid. It behaves like something you are further inside the longer you stay. And that is a very different kind of thing. Sunday evening carries the receipt. Having woken at 11, you are not tired at 11 at night, and you know it before your head touches the pillow. You lie there, entirely alert, doing arithmetic about how many hours are left before the alarm. Then Monday arrives with a familiar heaviness, and by Monday evening you are exhausted enough to swear you will fix your sleep this week. And by Saturday you are owed a lie-in again, and the whole circle turns once more. Millions of people run this loop every 7 days for decades. It is worth saying plainly, this is not a personal failure of discipline. It is a pattern, and patterns have causes. One detail reframes almost everything before it. Sleep inertia is not exclusive to long sleep. It happens after short sleep too. It happens after normal sleep. Wake anyone abruptly from the wrong depth and they will show it. The slowed reactions, the fog, the missing minutes. What the long weekend morning does is not create the state. It makes it more likely and more severe, and gives it more room to be noticed. So the fog was never the invader. It was always there, at the edge of every waking of your life, mostly too brief to name. Some mornings simply hold the door open long enough for you to see it. Set the pieces side by side, and the picture that emerges is not the one you started with. More sleep produced less rest. Coffee touched the alertness, but not the fog. The state cleared on its own by afternoon. Unearned. Naps reproduced it in an hour. Children have it strongest and lose it with age. None of that fits the idea that you were tired. Tiredness responds to sleep, and this does not. So the question we opened has quietly changed shape. It may not be why sleeping in makes you tired, but why the way your sleep ends should matter so much more than how long it ran. That is a different question entirely, and it has a mechanism underneath it that we have not yet touched. Something almost gentle sits in how ordinary the state is. It has been measured in astronauts, in doctors on call, in soldiers, in new parents, in firefighters, in every population where someone has to become useful quickly after being asleep. Nobody is exempt. Training does not appear to remove it, and no amount of willpower has been shown to shorten it. The most disciplined person you know, woken from the deepest part of their sleep, will stand in their kitchen and fail to find the mugs. That universality is the whole point. Whatever you have been calling your own morning weakness has been sitting in the operating manuals of institutions that cannot afford to be sentimental about it. So the weekend morning is not the anomaly you took it for. It is an ordinary state, arriving at full volume, in the one window of the week with nothing scheduled to hide it behind. On a Tuesday you are pulled from bed and thrown at a train, and the fog burns off unnoticed inside the noise of the day. On a Saturday, the same fog is simply the only thing in the room. You have not been sleeping badly. You have been given, for once, enough quiet to notice something that was always happening. And having noticed it, the only honest next question is what exactly is still finishing inside you while you stand there holding a cold cup. Let the room settle around you for a moment. That thickness in the first minutes after a long sleep, the arm that will not lift, the sentence that will not finish, is not a flaw you carry alone. It has been measured in strangers, in the dark, for decades. Whatever it is, it does not answer to effort. It has never once responded to trying harder, which means there is nothing here for you to do. Feel the weight in your limbs, and let it be weight, not a verdict. Something is finishing inside you tonight, on its own schedule, whether or not you understand it. What that something is, we go looking for next. Every waking hour, your brain spends energy, and the spending leaves a residue. Cells run on a molecule called ATP, and as it is broken down for fuel, adenosine is released into the spaces between neurons. Hour after hour it accumulates. Researchers can measure that rise directly in animal studies, and it tracks the deepening pull towards sleep almost hour for hour. This is what sleep pressure is actually made of. Not tiredness as an idea or a failure of will, but a chemical count of how long you have been awake. The tally began the moment your eyes opened this morning, and nothing you did all day either started it or stopped it. Sleep is when that tally gets paid down. Across a night, adenosine levels fall, and they do not fall evenly. The steepest clearance comes early, in the first deep stretches, when the pressure is highest and the gradient is widest. By the later hours, the curve has already flattened. There is far less left to remove. The 9th and 10th hours are not doing what the 2nd and 3rd did. They are working on a debt that has mostly been settled. That is the beginning of an odd arithmetic, where more of the same thing quietly stops buying more of the same result. And no one tells you the exchange rate has changed. Adenosine does not make you sleepy by filling space. It works by fitting into receptors, and the one that matters most for drowsiness is called A1. When adenosine binds an A1 receptor, it dampens the neuron it sits on, quieting cells in the basal forebrain and elsewhere that would otherwise keep the cortex bright and alert. It is inhibition rather than sedation, a slow turning down of the systems that hold wakefulness open. The heaviness you know as sleepiness is a small molecule closing thousands of doors, one at a time, in a brain that never announces the work to the person doing the sleeping. There is a second door, called A2A. It sits in regions including the basal forebrain and the shell of the nucleus accumbens, and instead of quieting arousal cells directly, it appears to switch on the sleep-promoting ones. Two receptor types, two different routes to the same destination. This matters because the balance between them shapes how firmly sleep is held and how cleanly it lets go. Nothing here is a single lever being pulled. Sleepiness is a negotiation between receptor families running in every human skull on the planet tonight, and it has never once consulted the person about the terms. Caffeine does not remove adenosine. It is an antagonist, a molecule shaped closely enough to slip into A1 and A2A receptors and sit there, blocking the real signal without triggering it. The adenosine is still present, still accumulating. The brain simply stops hearing it. That is why the lift is borrowed rather than earned. When the caffeine clears, every message that was held at the door arrives at once. It is one of the few places where you can watch a mind's chemistry being edited in real time, and where the edit changes only the reading on the gauge, never the number underneath it. Deep in the front of the hypothalamus sits a small cluster of cells called the ventrolateral preoptic nucleus, the VLPO. It is one of the brain's few dedicated sleep switches. Its neurons release GABA and a peptide called galanin, and they aim these inhibitory signals directly at the systems that manufacture wakefulness. When the VLPO fires, arousal falls away. Damage to this region, in both animal work and human case reports, produces profound and lasting insomnia. So sleep is not the absence of something. It is an active instruction, issued nightly by a specific piece of tissue roughly the size of a grain of rice, in your head and in everyone else's. On the other side of that switch is the ascending arousal system, and it is not one center but a chorus. Noradrenaline from the locus coeruleus, histamine from the tuberomammillary nucleus, serotonin from the raphe nuclei, acetylcholine from the brainstem and basal forebrain. Each sends fibers upward, and together they hold the cortex in the state where a world can be assembled into experience. Wakefulness has no single source. It is a committee, and the committee has to agree. When you feel awake, you are feeling several separate chemical systems arriving at the same conclusion at very nearly the same moment. These two sides inhibit each other. The VLPO silences the arousal chorus. The arousal chorus silences the VLPO. Neuroscientists call this arrangement a flip-flop switch, and its whole purpose is decisiveness. Mutual inhibition drives the system toward one state or the other and resists the middle ground. That is the design, and it exists so that you are not half asleep at the wheel. Which means the muddled state you can wake into is not the switch working gently. It is the switch failing to snap. The confusion you stood in at 11 on a Saturday morning was a circuit built to be binary, caught briefly being neither. The switch has a stabilizer. Neurons in the lateral hypothalamus release orexin, also known as hypocretin. And rather than picking a side, orexin reinforces whichever side is currently winning, holding the state steady. We know how much this matters from what happens in its absence. In narcolepsy type 1, these orexin neurons are largely lost, and the boundary between sleep and wake turns porous, each state intruding on the other. Stability is not free, and it is not automatic. It is manufactured nightly by a few tens of thousands of cells, and the transition is precisely where their work becomes visible. When the switch does not snap, the electrical evidence is right there on the scalp. Record an EEG across an awakening and the slow waves, the delta activity that is the signature of deep sleep, do not vanish the moment the eyes open. They persist, decaying over minutes, and researchers have found they tend to linger longest over frontal regions. For a stretch after waking, then, the brain is running two states at once, awake by every outward measure, still partly asleep by its own electrical readout. The confusion is not imagined, and it is not exaggerated. It has a waveform, and it is still writing itself down. The brain also has to be resupplied. Cerebral blood flow falls during sleep, particularly in deep non-REM, and it does not surge back the instant you open your eyes. Imaging studies show the reperfusion is gradual and uneven, with some regions repressurized well before others. So for a while after waking, parts of your cortex are still working on a reduced budget, asked to think with blood that has not fully arrived. Consciousness returns before its own infrastructure does. Whatever you are attempting in those minutes, you are attempting it in a building where the lights are still coming on, floor by floor. The order of return is not random. In imaging work led by Thomas Balkin, blood flow after waking came back first to the brainstem and thalamus, the machinery of basic arousal, while the anterior cortex, including the prefrontal regions, lagged behind, taking on the order of 15 minutes to catch up. The prefrontal cortex is where planning lives, and judgment, and the quiet sense of being a person with intentions. It is the last light on in the house. For those minutes, you are genuinely awake and genuinely without the part of you that decides things, which is a poor moment to let it decide anything about you. In the year 2000, Patricia Tassi and Alain Muset gathered decades of scattered evidence into the review that became the field's reference point for a state named a generation earlier: sleep inertia. Their synthesis showed it was not a mood or a lack of discipline, but a measurable transitional period with a course, a duration, and a clear effect on reaction time. The heaviness after a long night had been treated as a leftover of sleep, a residue to wait out. The evidence points the other way. Leaving sleep is a process of its own, with its own machinery. If that holds, the question is no longer how much sleep you got. It is what the leaving of it costs. How large is that cost in a small, tightly controlled study published in JAMA in 2006? Wirtz and colleagues gave 9 people an addition test in the first minutes after waking, and compared those scores with the same people's performance after 26 hours with no sleep at all. The first minutes after a full night came out as impaired as the sleep-deprived condition, and on some measures worse. Read plainly. The moments just after a whole night of sleep can be more compromised than a night with none. Every mind does this. Whatever you concluded about yourself in the first few minutes of a morning was concluded by a brain not yet qualified to judge. Even the arousal chorus does not simply resume. Recordings show that noradrenergic neurons in the locus coeruleus fire fastest during wakefulness, slow considerably in non-REM sleep, and fall nearly silent in REM. The histamine neurons follow a similar wake-active pattern. Coming back online, these cells ramp rather than leap, and the cortex downstream takes longer still to answer what they send. So waking is not the throw of a lever. It is a slope, and the thick, strange minutes near the bottom of it are not a sign that something in you is broken. They are the slope itself, being climbed by every brain that has ever woken. Let your jaw loosen, and let the whole weight of your head belong to the pillow. The chemistry we have been tracing is running underneath this moment too. Unhurried, asking nothing of you and not needing you to follow it. If you would like more of these long, quiet walks through the science of sleep, you are welcome to subscribe. There is no hurry, and nothing to decide tonight. If you are already drifting, let this stay where it is. The rest of the night continues on its own, and so does the science, whether you follow it or fall asleep somewhere inside it. There is a rhythm running under your sleep that has nothing to do with what time you set the alarm. Sleep moves in cycles of roughly 90 minutes, often anywhere from 80 to 110, each one carrying you down through lighter stages into deep sleep, then back up toward dreaming before starting over again. Across a normal night, you complete 4 or 5 of these. Sleep in, and you do not simply extend the last one. You begin another, and the extra hours drop you somewhere inside it. Where you happen to surface was decided hours before you woke, by a rhythm that started without you. No 2 cycles are built the same, and that is what makes the timing matter so much. The cycles early in the night are heavy with slow wave sleep, the deepest and most physically anchored stage, while the cycles nearest morning stretch their dreaming portion longer and keep deep sleep brief. So the architecture of your night is not a flat line you can simply add hours to. It is a shape that changes as it goes. The 9th hour of sleep is nothing like the 3rd. It holds different stages in different proportions, and it offers you entirely different places to wake from. The 9th hour was never going to be the 3rd one over again. Waking is not one experience. It depends almost entirely on which floor of sleep the door happens to open on. Sleep researchers have found consistently that surfacing out of slow-wave sleep produces the heaviest and longest-lasting grogginess, far worse than waking from lighter stages or from dreaming. Come up out of light sleep and the morning arrives gently, almost as though the body had been standing at the door already. Come up out of deep sleep and it is like being hauled from the bottom of a well. Same person, same number of hours, a different exit, and an entirely different morning waiting on the other side. A week of shortened nights leaves something owed, and the body collects. When sleep has been restricted and is then finally allowed to run long, deep, slow-wave sleep tends to return with unusual force. A rebound, pushed along by accumulated pressure. What is striking is when it can arrive. Deep sleep that would normally have finished before midnight can reappear in the later cycles, in the hours of full morning light, precisely when you are most likely to decide you have had enough and sit up. The debt does not repay itself politely. It repays itself in the deepest sleep of the week, at the worst possible hour. Meanwhile, something inside you never agreed to the weekend. The circadian clock in the hypothalamus keeps its own schedule, set slowly across weeks by light and routine, and it does not know that Saturday is different from Tuesday. Body temperature still begins climbing toward its usual morning rise. The hormonal preparations for waking still assemble on weekday time. So while you sleep on into the late morning, an internal timetable proceeds quietly without you, running the day it has always run. 2 clocks are now telling different times inside the same body, and only one of them is asleep. This is why the alarm-free morning, the one you looked forward to all week, can still end badly. Nothing wakes you at 7. So sleep simply continues past the point where the clock expected it to stop. But circadian drive for wakefulness climbs anyway across the late morning, rising into sleep instead of into daylight. And sleep pushed against that rising signal turns thin and easily broken. The hours after your usual wake time are rarely restful hours. They are shallow, fragmented sleep laid over a body already trying to begin the day. You gained time and lost quality in the very same stretch. Then the weekend quietly rearranges the clock itself. Staying up later means more light in the evening, and evening light tells the clock to run late. Melatonin, the hormone that marks the beginning of biological night, starts its release later the following evening. Waking later removes the correction that would have pulled it back. 2 nights of this is enough to shift the whole internal schedule an hour or more later than it was. Nothing about the room changed. The room was never what mattered. What moved was when your body believes night begins, and it moved while you were asleep and unable to object. There is a name for this. Chronobiologists Till Roenberg and Mark Wittmann called it social jet lag, the gap between the midpoint of your sleep on free days and on work days, measured in hours. exactly the way we measure the crossing of time zones. Large population studies using this measure have reported that a substantial share of people carry at least an hour of it, and many carry considerably more. And the question we opened begins to turn here. Perhaps the lion leaves you worse not, despite being extra sleep, but because of when that sleep falls. Less a matter of hours than of a clock moved quietly out from under you. Something else is lost while the curtains stay closed. Morning light is the strongest signal the body clock has, and its timing is what keeps that clock anchored to the world outside. Light early in the day pulls the schedule earlier. Light late in the day pushes it later. Sleeping through the brightest and most correcting hours means the one message that could have held the clock in place is never delivered at all. So the drift is not only added by the late night, it is left uncorrected by the late morning. The weekend does not merely move you. It removes the thing that would have moved you back. And then, Monday. The alarm returns at its old hour, but the internal clock has spent 2 days sliding westward and has not slid back. You are asked to wake, work, and think clearly at a time your body now reads as the middle of its own night. The same demand made of someone who flew a time zone away over the weekend and flew home before dawn on Monday. Nothing is wrong with you. The exhaustion has a shape, and that shape has a reason. It belongs to a body doing exactly what any body does when its hours stop agreeing with the world's. You have just heard that a morning can go wrong by arriving at the wrong hour rather than after too little rest. That the count of hours was never the whole story. If some part of you has ever done that arithmetic and come up bewildered, let the arithmetic rest now. There is nothing here to solve, and nothing you got wrong. Notice the weight of your head where it lies, and let it be heavy without needing to be explained. Let one slow breath go. What follows leans further into this, not toward fault, but toward the shape of the thing. You have probably noticed that some people surface easily at 6 and others do not become themselves until noon, and that this seems to have nothing to do with willpower. Researchers have measured this since the 1970s, when Horn and Ostberg built a questionnaire to sort people along a scale from strongly morning to strongly evening. What it measures is not preference but physiology, where an individual's internal night actually falls. Most people land somewhere in the middle, with true larks and true owls at the tails. Whichever end you recognize yourself at, you did not choose it, and you are not alone at that end. Being a late type is inherited more than it is adopted. Twin studies estimate that something close to half of the variation in chronotype is genetic, and researchers have traced part of it to variants in the clock genes themselves. PER3 and CRY, one among them. Small differences in the machinery that times the internal day. A single change in CRY1 has been linked to a familial pattern of running hours late, running through whole families. So the person who cannot fall asleep before 2 is not undisciplined. Their clock is built to run late. In the same way, yours is built to run wherever it runs. Late chronotypes are the ones who sleep longest when nobody is scheduling them. Given a free day, they do not simply wake later. they log more total hours, because the work week has been asking them to wake in the middle of their biological night all along, and the free morning is the first chance the body has to finish. This is why the longest lie-ins tend to belong to the people who feel worst on Monday. The extra hours are not indulgence. They are a body taking back sleep it was never allowed to have. If you have ever tried to wake a teenager, you have met this in its purest form. At puberty, the timing of melatonin release shifts markedly later. Work by Mary Cascadon and colleagues showed that this delay is biological, tied to development rather than to phones or defiance. The adolescent brain still needs somewhere near 8 to 10 hours, but it cannot easily begin them at 10 in the evening. So the teenager who sleeps until noon on Saturday has chosen nothing at all. They are catching a night that started 2 hours after the household turned out the lights. And then, quietly, it reverses. When Roenberg's group mapped chronotype across tens of thousands of people, they found lateness rising all through adolescence, peaking around the age of 20, and then turning back toward morning for the rest of life. It is one of the most reliable biological markers of the end of adolescence, the moment your clock stops running away from the day. Most people never notice it happen. Whatever hour your body currently prefers, you have already been several other people on that curve, and you will be another one later. Then there are the people the clock was never designed for. Roughly 1 in 5 workers in industrialized countries works outside standard daytime hours. Nurses, drivers, bakers, the people who keep the lights on while everyone else sleeps. Their sleep runs against the internal signal for wakefulness instead of with it. So daytime sleep tends to be shorter and more broken than night sleep of the same length. The hours are there. The recovery is not. And on the first free day, they do exactly what you do on a Saturday, for exactly the same reason, and wake up feeling exactly as strange. What shift work makes visible is that fragmentation and duration are 2 different things. Sleep can be broken by brief arousals that never rise to full waking. The sleeper does not remember them, cannot report them, and will honestly say they slept 9 hours. Yet those brief interruptions keep sleep from consolidating into its deeper stages. This is one of the quiet reasons a long night can leave so little behind. You are not misremembering the hours. The hours were real. What went missing happened underneath them, in a place memory never reaches. Parents of newborns know a version of this that no chart quite captures. A study published in Sleep in 2019, following more than 4,000 parents, found that sleep duration and sleep satisfaction dropped sharply in the first months after birth and had still not returned to pre-pregnancy levels 6 years later. 6 years. The nights slowly lengthen again, but something about the depth does not fully return on schedule. If you have carried that particular tiredness, the one that outlasts the reason for it, you were not imagining its length. Sleeping too much is one of the oldest signs of a mind in trouble. In major depression, the more familiar picture is broken sleep and early waking, but a substantial minority. often estimated near 15 to 20% and higher in younger patients and in atypical presentations. Sleep longer instead. 10, 11, 12 hours, and no better for it. Clinicians call it hypersomnia, and it is listed in the diagnostic criteria alongside insomnia, as though the illness could bend sleep in either direction. If your long mornings have ever felt heavier than tiredness explains, that heaviness has been described, named, and studied for decades. The relationship runs both ways, which is what makes it hard to see clearly. Disturbed sleep is a symptom of depression, and disturbed sleep is also one of the better established risk factors for developing it. Prospective studies have tracked people forward and found the sleep trouble often arriving first. So the long, unrefreshing sleep is neither purely cause nor purely consequence. It is one loop of a circle turning inside a person, each half feeding the other. No one standing inside that circle can tell which part started, and that is not a failure of insight. It is the shape of the thing. Now think of the last time you had a real fever. You did not choose to sleep 12 hours. Something chose it for you. Biologists call this sickness behavior, the withdrawal, the appetite loss, the enormous pull towards sleep. And it is not the body giving up. It is a coordinated, evolved response, conserved across species, that redirects energy toward fighting an infection. The pull is so strong it overrides everything else you had planned. It has been doing this far longer than there have been calendars to disrupt, and it has never once asked permission. What drives that pull is chemistry we can name. Immune signaling molecules called cytokines, interleukin-1 and tumor necrosis, factor alpha among them, increase during infection. And decades of work by James Kruger and others has shown that these same molecules promote non-REM sleep directly. Inject them and sleep deepens. Block them and it lightens. So the exhaustion of illness is not vague. It is a message written in a language the brain has always understood, delivered by the immune system to the sleep system, requesting more time. One piece of this reaches all the way to your Sunday. Those same cytokines are responsible for the way illness feels. The ache, the fog, the sensitivity to light, the flattened mood. Sleepiness and malaise arrive from the same source, which is why they never come apart. And a mild version of that chemistry does not require a virus. It can be raised by disrupted routine, by inflammation from other sources, by a body under strain. The feeling of coming down with something, without ever coming down with anything, has a chemical address. You have visited it. So has everyone. This is where the epidemiology becomes interesting. A large meta-analysis by Michael Irwin and colleagues, published in Biological Psychiatry in 2016, pooled dozens of studies and found that both short sleep and long sleep were associated with higher levels of two inflammatory markers: C, reactive protein, and interleukin-6. Normal sleep duration sat lowest of all. The relationship was not a straight line running down from too little to plenty. It was a curve, with the long sleepers rising on the far side of it. Whatever your own nights look like, they sit somewhere on that same curve. And the honest reading of that curve requires care. The association with TNF-alpha, the third marker people expect to find, has been far less consistent across studies. Present in some, absent in others. An association is not a mechanism. It tells you that long sleep and low-grade inflammation are found together in populations. It does not tell you which one arrived first, or whether a third thing brought both. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in this territory, and it is the distinction that gets lost every time this research is repeated out loud. Because the arrow may well point backward. If cytokines deepen and lengthen sleep, and the experiments say they do, then a body carrying quiet inflammation from illness, injury, or something not yet diagnosed will tend to sleep longer as a result. In that reading, the long sleep is not producing the inflammation. It is answering it. Sleep is doing exactly what it evolved to do, and the body is trying to make room for a repair you cannot feel and did not order. Your body is doing this arithmetic tonight, without telling you. So the question we started with has quietly sharpened. We began by asking why a long weekend sleep can leave you more tired than rested, as though the problem lived in the hours. But everything gathering here suggests the hours were only ever the visible part. The readout of a clock knocked sideways, and a body running warm with signals it never announced. The tiredness is not evidence of a lie-in gone wrong. It is evidence of something underneath the lie-in that the extra sleep was already responding to. Now the most quoted finding in this entire field, and the one most often told badly. In 2010, Francesco Cappuccio and colleagues pooled prospective studies covering more than 1 million people and found a U-shaped relationship between sleep duration and death from any cause. Short sleepers carried a relative risk near 1.12, and long sleepers, generally those above 8 or 9 hours, carried a relative risk near 1.3, not a doubling, not a tripling, but a modest tilt in the odds, spread across a very large crowd. 2 arms of a curve, with the middle sitting lowest. Long sleep, on paper, looked worse than short. Similar curves keep appearing wherever anyone looks. Later analyses from the same group and others have reported U-shaped or J-shaped associations between sleep duration and stroke, coronary heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and obesity. The long arm, often as elevated as the short one, sometimes more. The consistency is striking, and it is exactly what makes the finding so easy to misuse. A curve that reproduces itself across continents and decades feels like it must be telling you what to do. It is not. It is telling you where to look. Here is the caveat that must travel with that curve. Every time. Long sleep is strongly entangled with the things that shorten lives on their own. Undiagnosed illness, depression, chronic pain, obesity, sleep apnea, medication, poverty, and simply being older or frailer. People who are unwell sleep longer. That is the sickness behavior we just watched work. So a sick person's long sleep can appear in the data as long sleep causing sickness, when the causation runs the other way entirely. Epidemiologists call this reverse causation, and here it is not a technicality. It is probably most of the effect, which is why the responsible statement is narrower than the headline. When studies adjust for underlying illness and depression, the long sleep association weakens. Not always to nothing, but substantially. No trial has ever shown that shortening a healthy person's sleep extends their life, and no serious researcher recommends it. The current mainstream reading is that long sleep is best understood as a marker rather than a proven cause, a flag the body raises when something else is going on. Sleeping 10 hours is not killing you. It may be telling you something, and that is a very different sentence. So the correct posture toward your own long mornings is curiosity, not alarm. A single indulgent Sunday sits nowhere near this research, which follows habitual patterns across years. But a persist, unchosen need for 10 or 11 hours, the kind that does not lift, that arrives without a late night behind it, is worth mentioning to a doctor, not because the sleep is dangerous, but because it is honest. It reports something. Every mind has a way of signaling before it has words for the problem, and this is one of the oldest. And the last comfortable idea we hold about all this does not fully survive contact with the data either. Recovery sleep works, but only partly. In laboratory studies of chronic sleep restriction, people allowed to sleep long afterward recovered their subjective alertness faster than their actual performance, feeling repaid before they were. And in a 2019 study in Current Biology, Christopher Depner's group found that ad libitum weekend recovery sleep failed to prevent the metabolic deterioration caused by the restricted week. Insulin sensitivity kept sliding, even with the extra hours in hand. Something has been running underneath this whole night without asking you for anything. A clock that keeps its own time. An immune system that requests sleep in a language older than words. A body that has been answering questions you never knew were asked. None of it waited for you to understand it. Notice how little of you is actually required right now. Not the effort of getting this right. Not the arithmetic of hours. An idea is gathering here about what the extra sleep was really doing, and it is nearly in view. You can let it come to you. Part of the debt, it turns out, cannot be paid on a weekend at all. The pattern across recovery studies is uneven repayment. Some functions return quickly. Others lag well behind. And a few appear to need far more than a night or two of extra time. Meanwhile, the same extra hours that repay a little are the ones pushing the clock later and leaving the morning light uncollected. The catch-up is real, and it is partial, and it charges something for itself. Every mind that has tried it has met both halves. So here is what the night has been assembling, piece by piece. Stretching sleep is not free rest. It is not neutral, extra, a longer version of the same good thing, because the hours you add do not arrive in empty space. They arrive on top of a circadian clock that keeps its own schedule regardless. sliding it later. They arrive in a body where low-grade inflammatory signaling and long sleep travel together, leaving a residue that feels remarkably like the beginning of an illness. Oversleeping does not repair the way deprivation damages. It scrambles from the other side. So the answer, when it finally arrives, is quieter than the question felt. What the body reads is not the total on the clock face. It reads when the light came, when the eyes opened, when the day began to look like the day before it. Duration is the number we count because it is easy to count. Regularity is the thing the system was actually listening for, all along, in every body that has ever slept. There is a way to put a number on that listening. Researchers, led by Andrew Phillips, working with colleagues at Brigham and Women's Hospital and Harvard, introduced the Sleep Regularity Index in a 2017 paper in Scientific Reports. It scores from 0 to 100, the odds that you are doing the same thing, asleep or awake, at this hour today and this hour tomorrow. 100 means your yesterday and your today are the same shape. It does not ask how long you slept at all. That study followed 61 college students for a month. Sleep written down day after day as it happened. The steadier sleepers did better academically and carried earlier circadian timing than the irregular ones. The part worth sitting with is what the two groups shared. Total sleep time did not clearly separate them. Both groups were sleeping about the same number of hours. Only the arrangement of those hours differed, and the arrangement was what tracked with how the days went. The finding has since been looked for in much larger crowds. Working with data from around 60,000 adults in the UK Biobank who wore accelerometers for a week, Windred and colleagues reported in the journal Sleep that sleep regularity predicted mortality risk more strongly than sleep duration did. One study is never the whole picture, and hours still matter. But in that very large dataset, the steadiness of the pattern carried more signal than the size of it. Sleep scientists had already begun trying to write down what healthy sleep even means. In 2014, Daniel Bousset proposed a framework built from 5 dimensions: satisfaction, alertness, timing, efficiency, and duration. Duration is there. It is one of 5. And regularity is not on that list at all. It had to be added afterward. A 6th dimension bolted on once the evidence caught up, which tells you something about how long the steadiness of sleep sat outside the conversation while everyone argued about the number of hours. The body cares about sameness for a reason that is almost mechanical. The internal clock does not run at exactly 24 hours on its own. Careful studies of human circadian period found an average close to 24 hours and 11 minutes, slightly longer than the planet's day. That small difference has to be corrected, gently, every single day. A regular schedule is simply the correction arriving on time. Without it, the clock drifts, not out of disobedience, but out of arithmetic. Of all the moments in a night, one is more available to you than the rest. You cannot instruct yourself to fall asleep. Sleep arrives when the pressure and the clock agree. and neither takes requests. But you can decide when to get up. This is why sleep clinicians tend to hang the whole schedule on the waking end. It is the one hinge that answers to a decision, and everything downstream quietly organizes itself around it. The wake time matters most because of what usually follows it: light. And the gap between indoors and outdoors is far wider than it looks. A well-lit room might give you a few hundred lux. An overcast morning outside gives thousands. Direct sun gives tens of thousands. Stepping outside for a few minutes is not discipline. It is just handing the clock the one message it reads best. At the 1 hour, it is most ready to read it. This is also why the weekend repayment plan never quite balances. The arithmetic assumes sleep is a quantity you can be owed and handed back. 5 short nights. 1 long Saturday. The ledger squared. But nothing in the system reads a total. The clock reads when. And the weekend answer to a short week is to move the when further out of place. Then remove the morning light that would have pulled it home. You do not repay a rhythm in a lump. You can only start keeping it again. So how do you unwind a lie-in that has already happened gently and in small pieces? Sleep clinicians generally favor modest shifts, something in the range of 30 to 60 minutes at a time, rather than yanking a schedule back into place overnight. The body will follow a nudge more willingly than a shove. Nothing about this needs to be done tonight, and nothing about it needs to be done perfectly. It only needs a direction. And it does not require an alarm set as punishment. There is a habit of mind that treats a long sleep as a debt to be paid off with severity. An earlier alarm, a harsher morning, a rule enforced against yourself. The clock does not register severity. It registers repetition. A kind, consistent hour teaches it exactly as much as a cruel one does. And you get to keep your morning while it learns. And the hour you keep does not have to cost you the weekend. This is the part people brace against. The fear that steadiness means surrendering the one morning nothing is asked of them. It does not. The clock is reading the moment sleep ends, not what you do afterward. Rise at something near your usual hour. Let the light in, and the morning is still yours to spend lying down. Slowly, with nothing scheduled in it. You are keeping a signal, not a schedule. Light is the loudest cue, but it is not the only one. Meal times, activity, social contact, and even the body's own temperature curve act as weaker time signals. And they too repeat. Which means the thing the body is reading is not one heroic act. It is the accumulated shape of ordinary days. When you eat, when you move, when the room goes quiet. A life has a rhythm, whether or not anyone intends one. Sit with what that means for a moment, because it changes the accusation. All those mornings you surfaced from 11 hours feeling worse than you did on 5. Nothing in you was failing to appreciate rest. You were giving a rhythm reading system more of the wrong currency. The body did not want your hours. It wanted to know what day it was, and where in that day it stood. That is a very different thing to have gotten wrong. And the fog itself is not the damage. It is the crossing. Every heavy morning you have ever had was a system in transition between two states, doing the work of moving from one to the other while you stood in the middle of it, feeling like evidence of something. It was never evidence. It was a passage. And passages have a far side, whether or not you can see it from inside them, which is why the fog keeps its promises. It fades. It always has. Every single one of those mornings ended, and you were not the one who ended it. The hours simply moved on and found you ordinary again. Not one of them left a mark on you that stayed. The headache went. The syrup thinned. The day found its footing by afternoon, and the body that did that for you, over and over, without instruction, was never once broken. So consider forgiving the mornings you lost to it. That whole catalogue of Sundays where you got up at 2 in the afternoon and moved through the rest of the day underwater, apologizing to no one in particular. Those were not wasted through any fault of character. They were the predictable output of a clock left without its cue. Nothing about them was a verdict on you. They were only a pattern, and patterns can be set down. Notice, too, how little the correction actually asks. Not a regimen, not a program, not another thing to be good at. 1 hour, roughly held, at the end of sleep rather than the beginning. The hour you already have to face anyway. The whole of it fits inside a decision you are going to make regardless. There has rarely been a change this small that the body reads this clearly, and it releases you from an arithmetic you never should have been doing. You have probably run it. If I felt this bad after 11, something is wrong with me, or with my body, or with how much I need. The equation had the wrong terms in it, and it was answering a question the body never asked. There was nothing wrong with wanting the long sleep, and nothing weak in feeling worse after it. Almost nobody says this part out loud. This weekend, in millions of bedrooms, people will sleep late and rise foggy and blame themselves for it in the privacy of their own kitchens. They will not mention it. It feels too much like a personal failing to say aloud. It is one of the most common experiences a modern human body has, and one of the least confessed. Millions of people, this Sunday, each certain they are the only one holding the cup. And you will not feel the correction as an event. That is the strange thing about rhythm. Kept well, it announces nothing. There is no bright morning that arrives to tell you it worked. Only a Monday that comes without weight, and passes without comment, and is forgotten by lunch. The reward for keeping the hour is an absence. The thing you have braced against for years simply not being there. Most good rhythms are invisible from the inside, and the body is quick to forgive. Given a steady wake time and a little morning light, the clock re-anchors over a handful of days, not a lifetime. Nothing you did to it this month is written in permanent ink. It has been waiting, patiently, for a signal it can read, the way it waits for everyone. And it will begin taking its bearings. Again, the first ordinary morning you give it one. There is nothing to act on tonight. This night is already doing the thing being described. You are lying here at an hour, and that hour is information, and the system is reading it without any help from you at all. Whatever you decide about tomorrow can be decided tomorrow. What is happening right now is simply one more data point in a pattern being collected while you rest. And no single night was ever the whole story. Not the 11-hour one. Not the 4-hour one before an early flight. Not this one either, whatever it turns out to be. The clock is not reading tonight. It is reading the shape you make across weeks. And shapes are forgiving of individual points. You cannot ruin a rhythm from inside a single evening. You can only keep making one, ordinary morning by ordinary morning. You were never lazy. Somewhere behind all those heavy mornings, there was a body doing exactly what it was built to do, asking, in the only language it has, for a shape it could recognize. Not more of you, not better of you, just the same quiet hour, coming back around, the way it comes back around for everyone. It was not asking for more hours. It was asking for a rhythm. And it has been asking kindly the whole time. The answer turned out to be a smaller thing than the exhaustion suggested. Not a number to reach, but an hour to keep. Somewhere back there, we found that the deepest clearing of the night comes early, when the pressure is highest, and that the later hours are working against a debt mostly settled. We found too that where you surface was decided hours before you woke, by a rhythm that began without you. The heaviness was never about how much. It was always about when. You came in with a question about hours and you leave holding something else. The knowledge that your body has been asking for a rhythm, not a quantity, and that the fog was proof of the asking, not proof of a flaw. If you have ever surfaced from a long, dark morning with a headache and no idea why, this one may be worth passing to someone who wakes the same way and says nothing about it. A subscribe keeps these hours returning at their own steady time. A small kindness for the people who thought it was only them. Picture the long, slow curve of a clock inside you, correcting itself by 11 minutes a day, needing nothing more than the morning to know where it is. That correction is running underneath you right now, in the dark, without instruction. Let your whole being dissolve into that quiet keeping of time. No hours to count. No arithmetic left to run. Something in you has always known the shape it wanted, and it is holding it for you tonight. The hour is simply passing through you now, the way it passes through everyone lying down at this moment. Let your breath find its own length. Nothing here needs to be timed. Sleep will come the way a rhythm comes, not summoned, not earned, arriving on schedule at last. The Deep Sleep Guided by Mind Science playlist has been following the mind's own quiet reasoning down into the dark. The next video carries this further. It picks up where this hour set itself down. If your eyes have already closed, there is nothing left to work out from behind them. Rest now, weary one. You were only ever asking for the same hour back. Let the mind's own science keep the time, and let the rhythm carry you down. Good night.